Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evidence Dialogues. I'm Yvonne McDermott Rees. I'm a professor of law at Swansea University in the UK, and I'm one of the Evidence Dialogues teams. I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor Gheorghe Tecuci, who's a professor of computer science and director of the Learning Agent Center in the School of Computing of George Mason University in Virginia. Gheorghe has published over 200 papers with contributions to artificial intelligence, knowledge engineering, cognitive assistance, machine learning, evidence-based reasoning, and intelligence analysis, as you'll see from his wonderful collection of books behind him. His latest book is Critical Thinking for Intelligence Analysis, Connecting the Dots. That was written with the late David Shum, and that was published earlier this year. This builds heavily on their earlier book, Intelligence Analysis as Discovery of Evidence, Hypotheses and Arguments, published by Cambridge University Press in 2016. He has received the US Army Outstanding Civilian Service Medal for groundbreaking contributions to the application of artificial intelligence to center of gravity determination, which is very cool, and the Innovative Application Awards from the American Association for Artificial Intelligence. So welcome, Gheorghe. For starters, I'd love to hear about your journey to intelligence studies and thinking about how people connect the dots, as you say. How did you first get interested in this field?
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be your guest. I'm a computer scientist and artificial intelligence researcher with a long career interest in developing instructable computer systems. These are systems that can be taught by its user rather than programmed. For instance, a doctor, an engineer, or an intelligence analyst can teach this agent how to perform a certain task rather than programming it, and in a way that is similar to how one would teach a student or a collaborator. So as it learns, it tries to solve problems by itself, and it makes mistakes, and you as a teacher will correct the mistakes, and in time you learn to replicate your problem-solving expertise and behavior. And for that reason, I call this agent disciple agents. They become a kind of disciple of yourself. Now, my work in intelligence analysis started about 20 years ago when Dr. Susan Durham and Bill Nolte they were a program manager for intelligence community at the time, decided to fund my proposals to build such instructable agents in the field of intelligence analysis. So now with David Shum, I started the collaboration in 2007. He joined our team by that time. And he already had a lot of work prior to that in intelligence analysis. You can see he had very important books. And it was very a chance for me to work with him. I knew him for a long time. He was working at George Mason University with me, but we never collaborated. Now I consider Dave one of the greatest thinkers of all time. I want to show you a picture. Just a moment, I need to somehow share it if I can. So I put him in this company. Now, Dave is one that initiated the connecting the dots idea, as well as many other ideas that we work together to develop. And now that he has passed away for some time, I am doing by myself. So basically, this is his idea that I'm continuing.
That's fantastic. And I saw John Henry Wigmore in your slides there and Charles Sanders Peirce. So you really see it as a clear line of, from sort of, I guess, rationalist epistemology, the idea that truth is so whether you or I say it is or not. I think that was Sanders Peirce, and this sort of structuring of argumentation. Yeah. A few of us on the Evidence Dialogues project are committed Wigmorian scholars. As you probably know, William Twining, who of course co-authored with David Shum and Terry Anderson. And, you know, I would say in legal studies, Wigmore is still really hugely influential when we think about drawing inferences from mixed masses of evidence. I wondered, to what extent have these ideas, I think you mentioned in your book that, you know, people like Douglas Walton had developed these sort of argumentation models, but seemingly almost unaware, or at least not citing some of the work by Wigmore, which was doing a similar kind of thing in a different context many years earlier. How influential would you say that Wigmore has been in shaping the computer science around things like structured argumentation models?
Well, John Henry Wigmore was a brilliant American scholar. He was professor and dean of the School of Law at Northwestern University. Yeah. And he's best known for his treatise, the treatise on the Anglo-American system of evidence in trial and common law, including the statutes and judicial decision for all jurisdiction in the United States. This was first published in 1904, 1905, and then the latest edition has 10 volumes, published recently by David Shum, William Twining, and others. And in 1913, Wigmore proposed a structure to represent the opposing parties in a litigation. But he liked it very much and promoted it very much, but his great disappointment was never adopted by his colleagues, by lawyers and judges. And the reason was that these diagrams seemed very complex. I want to show you one of them. And this is it's actually a fragment from the argumentation in a famous case, and basically tries to prove that Wigmorian felt revengeful, murderous emotion toward the guy who is accused of killing. Now you can see there are very many lines and symbols. The line represents processes, represent reasoning from premises to conclusion, or its refutation, raising an objection called explanation, or refuting an explanation. And the lines connect shapes. And you see there are a great variety of shapes. They represent testimonial assertion, explanation, and refutations. And each can be marked to reflect its source. Finally, the strength of the ultimate belief can be recorded with the shape of doubt, belief, or disbelief. So there are very many symbols. They represent very accurately the litigation process, but judges and lawyers of his time found this very complicated. And for that reason, they are basically ignored, and for many years. Now, you may have known about Stephen Toulmin. He became famous in the 70s, 60s, and 70s for Toulmin diagrams, yeah, which in Shum's view and my view are nothing else but simplified versions of the Wigmorian diagrams.
Yeah.
But Toulmin never cites Wigmore, either because he never was aware of his work or whatever reason. But anyway, Wigmore was totally forgotten. And if you, I need to drink some water or coffee.
Yes, I said Douglas Walton in my question, but of course Toulmin came first with this.
So in the 70s, the Wigmorian diagram were independently rediscovered by 3 individuals. William, and actually I want to show you them, a picture of them. William Twining from the United Kingdom, as you know very well. Terence Anderson and David Chan from UK. They all taught law courses using Wigmorian diagrams. Now, when I started working with David, I discovered Wigmorian networks, and I realized a striking similarity between these Wigmorian networks and the structure I was implementing in my system for problem solving.
Yeah.
This structure is called problem analysis and solution synthesis. And I realized that if a problem becomes a hypothesis and the solution is a probability of being true, then this becomes a Wigmorian network,
Yeah.
a Wigmorian diagram. And so what I did then, I started the process of simplification of Wigmorian diagrams, and as William Twining called this, complexification.
Why a complexification rather than a simplification?
Sorry?
Why does he call it a complexification rather than a simplification?
Well, no, they are both. And I will show in a moment.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a simplification because if you compare what I call a Wigmorian diagram or Wigmorian network or WigNet with the original diagram of Twining of Wigmore, you see that it's much simpler. I have a hypothesis that can be decomposed with various arguments and simple arguments down to the level of evidence. So this is a network.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you have the relevance of evidence or hypothesis, or the relevance of an argument or hypothesis, W1. So from this point of view, it's a significant simplification. We don't have all these symbols. We don't care about them.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, this network is a complex computational structure. You can regard it as an argumentation, as I showed here, or even regard it as a deep neural network, where these weights are initially given by the subject matter experts, but then they could be learned from examples and refined and fine-tuned. So this is also a representation of analysis and synthesis. Analysis when I decompose hypotheses and sub-hypotheses, and synthesis when I compose their solutions or probabilities. It can be learned in the sense of using a multi-strategy learning approach, multiple methods, where from each argument I can learn a rule. Also, the probabilities that are used are based on Baconian fuzzy. It's a combination of Baconian and fuzzy probabilities. And I also compute not only the probability of a hypothesis, but also its confidence in this probability. So you see, it has a lot of semantics, and that's why I call it a complexification.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's amazing that Wigmore had a lot of good intuition, but he was not a computer scientist, and so therefore, and it was a long time ago, computers were not at the time part of the culture. So, so these Wigmorian networks became the main computational structure of my systems. And one of the systems I developed was, what I'm developing right now, is Dr. Fred Garner. He's a very experienced Harvard-educated pediatrician, and this system will be operated by a parent. And the goal is to, you imagine that the parent has a child that may have a problem, may seem ill, and the parent would use this system to make a preliminary differential diagnosis. And the system will help the parent to realize whether there are the following dispositions: self-care at home, or immediate emergency care, or urgent care within 24 to 72 hours, to seek medical advice from personal provider, or for the necessity for non-urgent office visit care. So the system will just help the parent to diagnose the child and take the appropriate measure. I think that this would be very useful.
Absolutely.
We are also writing together a book addressing computer critical thinking as it relates to US healthcare systems. That Fred thinks that is very badly utilized. As a consequence, a lot of money that parents spend on the healthcare. Now, this is just one other application of Gheorghian networks, but I have others that I have worked on and developed some experimental systems, such as in intelligence analysis. Now, anticipatory intelligence, sense making, knowledge discovery, malicious insider threats. If you are interested, I can enter into more detail on each of these domains, but
Yeah.
not.
Well, I just want to actually pick up on this idea of using a Wigmorian chart to essentially assist parents in if they're worried about their child and don't know whether they should go to the emergency room or not. So is the idea that it creates a sort of a decision tree for them to make that call themselves, or is it even more advanced than that it's like artificial intelligence, basically? Because I've seen quite a lot of things now online, obviously with ChatGPT, this has really taken off, that even doctors can ask ChatGPT, which is different. It's a language learning model, but it can come up with, okay, we've got a patient who's got these symptoms, and it will come up with a range of options. These are the possible causes of these symptoms. This is the most likely, and you can even ask it, should I go to the emergency room or not? But just to clarify, that what you're working on at the moment is different to that sort of.
It's very different. It's very different. It's basically you make various hypotheses on what might be the condition of the child.
Yeah.
And you have to check this hypothesis based on evidence. The system will guide you to look at what is the relevant evidence, and to analyze, and based on the evidence, will analyze the probability of each hypothesis. The hypothesis, I have a diagram to explain you this later on.
Okay.
It's different in the sense that this system, in a way, reasons as we reason, so we can understand. It's very transparent. Whereas ChatGPT and other neural network-based systems cannot explain the reasoning. And basically, so you see an answer that is very nice, very clean natural language, but it's actually not. There is no way for it to explain why is this answer.
Yes. Yeah.
I will provide you more details about this.
Yeah, we might come back to this later. It's interesting. I've been playing around with it quite a lot. And what I find really fascinating is ChatGPT is very good at giving a very confident answer that's completely wrong. So it's very convincing, but actually, if you know a little bit about what you've asked it, you're like, no, that's incorrect. But you can see the dangers in using these models for making quite important decisions. But anyway, let's return to some of the research interests. So I really enjoyed your observation that in intelligence analysis, that intelligence analysis is always probabilistic in nature, because you say evidence is always incomplete, it's usually inconclusive, it's frequently ambiguous, commonly dissonant, and with various degrees of credibility. And as you know, I work on international criminal trials, trials for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And it really struck me that all those things are true for evidence in international criminal trials as well. But one of the pushbacks I get quite a lot to saying, well, decision making should be more structured. We could use things like Wigmore charts or Wigmorian analysis to structure how judgments are reached, is that, well, look, if the judges did this for a big decision on, is this person criminally responsible for the crime of genocide, it's just so enormous that they would just never stop writing. They'd never be able to reach a judgment because it would take them so long to chart big cases of this nature with so much evidence. Have you come across a similar criticism in intelligence analysis? Is there this idea that, look, we should just leave, they're professionals, we should just leave them to take a big body of diverse evidence and come up with their own conclusions? They don't need to structure it in this way.
Yes, we did actually. There was he was citing his big books that you see here, 2 volumes. He published them in 1987, and he was citing this book as the most unread books ever written.
Most unread, really.
Anyway, he was trying very hard, and I'm continuing his work on convincing the intelligence analysts to adopt these methods. And up to now, we are not very successful, in fact. And the criticism was that one is very complicated. No, so for some reason they didn't like. They use this holistic approach where you read a lot of papers and you reach a conclusion and then you say, "This is my conclusion." Very much like ChatGPT actually. It ingests a lot of documents from the internet and then gives you a nice answer.
Yeah.
But the problem is first of all, I would say that Anderson, Twining, and Sham, all 3 of them were very convinced of the usefulness of the Gregorian diagrams, and they all use them in their courses. And even they didn't have a program to help them with developing it, so they recognize that there is a lot of work. But they said that this work is well justified.
Yeah.
By the result. So in particular, Dave was very critical on this holistic approach. That he said that that covers a lot of uncertainties.
Mm-hmm.
And my claim now is that this weakness that you see on the you no longer see probably on the screen.
No, I still see it.
Okay, are much simpler. And moreover, they could be, as I will show you, they could be generated automatically by a computer, much of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think the criticism is valid, but we need to convince these lawyers that this is a case. So they don't know actually about my work and about Dave and William Twining's work. So we need to convince them. They still are not recognizing this as important. But this is now part of our fault. We need to make this known.
Yeah.
So I agree with. I encounter this criticism, but I don't think that is justified. And let me show you. How you can develop such a diagram. But for now, let me stop here saying that I don't agree with the criticism, and we need to show them they can do it much better, much faster, and they could find better answers in this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a recent judgment in the International Criminal Court, and I think it really showed a difference in opinion actually between some of the judges who are very much in favor of a more holistic view of the evidence and others who really wanted to critically interrogate the evidence. And the judges in the second camp actually in their judgment had this nice line that said, we may be accused for having lost it, that by drilling down into the evidence too much, we lose sight of the wood for the trees. But how can you tell whether there is a wood at all unless you prove the existence of a single tree in the forest? So yeah, similar point of view, I think, to yours. Also kind of relating your research to some of the legal context I'm interested in, I was really struck by, you had this idea of there are 3 credentials of evidence. All evidence has these 3 credentials: relevance, credibility, and probative weight or inferential weight. And in making admissibility decisions, international criminal tribunals consider relevance, probative value, which I guess kind of combines reliability and significance, but so probably combines your two elements of credibility and inferential weight. But there's a third, which is whether that probative value is outweighed by considerations, potential prejudice to the accused. So basically, would it breach our principles of a fair trial to let this evidence in, maybe because of the ways in which it was gathered, or because it's perceived as unduly prejudicial relative to its probative value. I mean, what's your thoughts on, I think particularly seeing that you're based in the US, where they have even more strict exclusionary rules on things like hearsay and so forth. What's your view on that? How law structures what can even be considered? Would you be more in the camp of, well, like Jeremy Bentham, who was against all rules of evidence and said basically everything should be let in and considered? Do you think legal rules on what fact finders can include in the records and ultimately draw conclusions from help or hinder the search for truth?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so my specialty is not in law.
Yeah.
So I would give an answer in the sense that evidence is always incomplete. So if they consider that some evidence is not acceptable, or that's fine with me. But this, in order to find the truth, the lawyer would need to, investigative lawyer would need to work to find additional evidence. And so from this point of view, there is a problem if some is not acceptable, but I understand there are reasons of why some evidence items cannot be accepted. But so let me give you, you said at some point, maybe I remember you asked me, but I haven't answered, that intelligence analysis is more formal than law.
Yeah.
And that's why you probably from Dave's books and my books draw this conclusion, but this is the other way around. It is the law that is more formal.
Yeah.
So for instance, and I'll give you an example. Suppose that if you want to, in intelligence analysis, you want to prove some hypothesis, you have no guidance. You have a hypothesis, you have to build an argumentation for it. But in law, if you want to prove that someone is killed someone else, the law is telling you what to have to prove. You have to prove that the victim, let's call it Vic, was unlawfully killed, that it was the defendant who killed Vic, the defendant intended to kill Vic, and was not premeditation. Defendant intended beforehand, so was premeditation. The defendant intended to kill Vic beforehand, so was. So you need, the law is telling you that you need to prove these 4 things. So it's giving you the top level of argumentation. It's helping you doing this. No, I don't know any other field that gives you this. Actually, law is very, very prone to developing systems for it. So, and this idea of that the holistic approach is better, this is something that I totally disagree. And how can it be better? Because people read some stuff, listen to the evidence, and draw a conclusion. And if you ask them exactly how you reach this conclusion, they're incapable of doing it. While in the Wigmorian Wignet approach, they can not only show how you derive a certain conclusion, but also what's the probability of the conclusion being true. And what is your confidence in this probability? It's much clearer, much better, and simpler, actually. So, and this idea that you need to go very deep in this. Well, you go as deep as you wish, but you have a system to help you, as I will show you.
So in terms of that, the Wigmorian approach can give you a sort of a probabilistic judgment. How is that? Is that if you incorporate some elements of Bayesian probability into that, and then you update your beliefs based on the probability of...
Well, not Bayesian probabilities, but a combination of Baconian probabilities and fuzzy probabilities.
Okay.
And because it's very difficult for a person to tell you that, well, the probability is 76.7%. But it's much easier to give an answer like very likely, almost certain.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn this from intelligence analysis. Intelligence analysis has very nice rules that express probability in symbols rather than numbers. But these symbols, of course, correspond to some probability interval.
Yeah.
The Bayesian network, Bayesian is very complicated. The Bayesian rule is very complicated. The rules here are very simple to combine probability. So I take two hypotheses, the probability of the conjunction of two hypotheses, the minimum of this probability of their probabilities, and the probability of disjunctions of two hypotheses, the maximum. While in Bayesian rule is much more complicated. So I will show you, for instance, just a moment, I have a diagram here, since we are talking about this. Here is a probability scale that is used in intelligence community. I only added, actually I made a small modification of it. There was a large interval, this from 55 to 80 was called likely, but I broke it in two because it was too wide. So analysis will tell you that the conclusion is very likely or likely, which corresponds to a certain probability interval. And so for instance, I have this argumentation that decomposes hypothesis in simple hypothesis. In this case, I have, if hypothesis H1 and H2 are true, then almost certainly H is true. This is a conjunctive argument, favoring argument.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have hypothesis H3. And if H3 is true, then likely the hypothesis is false. And then I have, is in the jury, you have to make an unbalanced judgment between the two. So I have this argument that according to it, very likely the hypothesis is true. I have another argument that likely the hypothesis is false. So I make an unbalanced judgment, then I conclude that the likely is true. Now, these hypotheses are decomposed into simple ones. And here, for instance, I have a simple hypothesis. I don't know why I need to. And two items of evidence, one favoring it and one disfavoring it. And I have to judge the hypothesis based on these items of evidence. So I have the credibility of evidence that I need to judge. What is the probability that the hypothesis is true? And let's say it's almost certain. And I have to judge the relevance. What is the relevance that the hypothesis is true? Well, relevance is defined as assuming that the evidence is true. What is the probability of the hypothesis? So here, the evidence, let's say, asserts the hypothesis, so it's certain. And then I have the inferential force, which is the minimum of the two. So I have only min-max rules that the user can look at it and tell you what's the probability of various hypotheses and sub-hypotheses. In a Bayesian network, you cannot do this. Too complicated. You cannot even compute except for very simple networks. So you have some simulation programs to compute the probability. So these are much simpler. So for that reason, the reasoning is very clear. A judge would reach a conclusion and can show why this conclusion was reached.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And tell me, so you developed, speaking of tools, you developed a tool called Cogent. I think it was formerly called the Disciple CD tool. So tell us a bit about that. Is that basically is what we're looking at now, an example of a sort of an output?
Yeah, so here is how you use Cogent. Cogent comes from cognitive agent from Cogent analysis. Is a more recent version of Disciple CD. Mm-hmm. It comes from connecting the dots. So here, coming back to this issue of murder, assuming that you are an investigator and you find Vic dead on the flooring of his garage. And this shows a process of analyzing this hypothesis that is implemented in Cogent. And this is to be done together with Cogent. So you have a lawyer or an analyst together with Cogent working to answer this question. So the question is, how did Vic die? So through abductive imaginative reasoning, this person needs to imagine what are possible answers to this question. So these are the possible answers or alternative hypotheses. Vic died of natural causes, or Vic committed suicide, and so on. So he has a hypothesis. Now he has to determine which of them is actually most likely. So for this, he or she needs more evidence. So this is the second step of this process, where the person uses a hypothesis to guide the discovery of new evidence. And the reasoning goes like also following a Wigmorian logic. Assuming that this hypothesis is true, what other hypothesis should be true? And assuming that these sub-hypotheses are true, what evidence I should observe? And so in this case, in this way, it identifies new evidence, either favoring or disfavoring. And it can use this evidence to compute the probability of the hypothesis. In this case, I showed you, it goes like this. I want evidence for this. I'm using this Gregorian, but in a different sense. In order for this to be true, this to be need to be true, and, or in order for this to be false, this would need to be true. So for this to be true, either this would need to be true or this one. And assuming that, and we continue this decomposition to simpler and simpler hypotheses until the hypothesis shows clearly what evidence I should find that would favor it or disfavor it. And I look for it, and I find EX that favor and EY that disfavor. So this is using hypothesis to guide the search for evidence. And now I have the evidence. I go up in the synthesis mode to find the probability of H based on this evidence. So coming back to this diagram, doing this, I conclude, for instance, that it is likely with medium confidence that Vic died of a result of a crime. And these others don't have enough evidence support. So we compute both the probability and the confidence in the probability. Moreover, so you see this process, I show, assuming that you are using this system and the system never encountered this, this type of problem. So then in that case, I do this reasoning myself. But the system will learn rules to generate hypotheses from questions, rules to decompose hypotheses and discover new evidence, and rules for testing the hypothesis. And with these rules, it can attempt now I find another person that was found dead on the street or somewhere. The system will use the same rules. Now, it is not exactly the same process. So some of these rules may not apply well. So I look at the reasoning of the agent. Basically, I look at this Wigmorian argumentation that the agent will develop based on my rules. And I say, well, this part is not quite correct. So I correct the reasoning and it learns new rules and then make changes to the previous rules so that it no longer applies in this situation. So this is how the system learns incrementally. So this is a process that involves hypothesis generation, which is imaginative reasoning, with hypothesis testing, which is critical thinking or critical reasoning, and hypothesis discovery that also involves imaginative reasoning to build an argumentation. Requires imaginative reasoning. So you see here the user will be primarily responsible on the hypothesis generation side, but the cogent would generate the argumentation, much of it at least. So they help each other. So and as it learns from the system, what was once innovative and imaginative is no longer, is routine. It can be done by the system. And the system can learn rule and generate for certain questions, hypotheses.
So it's the system itself is able to generate hypotheses rather than
once it learned.
Wow, so interesting. So it's like augmented, rather than it being a tool just for the individual to kind of structure their own thoughts. It's also sort of helping with the what we would think, I think, traditionally are very human features, like imaginative reasoning, as you say. So interesting. So in terms of, we've kind of touched on this already, people's willingness to use this kind of system. Do you feel like, given that we're so confronted every day now with how advanced AI has become and how it can really help our lives, I suppose, in many ways, do you think that professionals might become more open to using tools like this? Or do you think we'll still meet quite a bit of resistance when it comes to professionals implementing this in their practice?
Well, I hope that they will use them, and I hope that they will realize it is much better, but they need to understand their limits.
Mm.
So, for instance, you mentioned these judges that oppose using such tools, and because they are afraid that the system will take over.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, I totally disagree with this, but the judges need to understand that they are using a tool. The tool is not giving the verdict, it's proposing a verdict, and they have to check whether this is correct or not, and whether they accept it or not. So ultimately, it's the judges that make the decision, not the tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned ChatGPT. So let me show you. Let me express some opinions about ChatGPT. I think I have a diagram here.
Mm-hmm.
This is the architecture of ChatGPT, a very high-level architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So it injects documents on the internet, represents them in a certain way, and train a neural network, a deep neural network here, right? You see it, and the network produces answers. And these answers are really very impressive. I mean, ChatGPT is amazing what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
But so, for instance, it can generate you maybe a verdict, and in natural language, it looks very natural, but it doesn't really understand what it is generating. It's just the way it generates it. This network receives some inputs that are represented by digits, 1, 0, and so on. Use a very complicated formula to compute an output that corresponds to what it generates to you. But it is a very complicated formula. There is no way to tell you why it generated this answer and not another answer. Moreover, it is based on the information it found on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So if this information is wrong, your answer will be wrong.
Yeah.
If this information, and moreover, this information is dated. So the last version of ChatGPT, ChatGPT 4, only uses information up to 2021.
Mm.
It doesn't have time to ingest in your documents, okay?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of limitation of this. So basically, this is just a tool, and we need to understand it as a tool. And the way I would use it is that I use it to generate some answers, but then I judge the answer. So,
Yeah.
but it is very easy. It is much easier to judge an answer than to find the answer in the first place. So from this point of view, ChatGPT is very useful.
Yeah.
But I would not take it as the ultimate authority. And besides, it cannot represent. These are the main drawbacks of neural networks, and they give impressive results. They can recognize faces and any of us better than any of us, but they cannot explain their reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a big problem. And our approach, on the contrary, is a very transparent approach that explains the reasoning. So
yeah, I had an interesting thing with it where I was asking ChatGPT, can you tell me what? So there's an author in the US whose work I've read quite a lot called Nancy Combs. So I said, can you tell me what Nancy Combs argues about evidence in international criminal trials? And I know she's written this book called Fact Finding Without Facts that really criticizes the evidentiary underpinnings of some of the judgments, because, you know, she went back to the transcripts and found that this, you know, people had such huge inconsistencies in their statements and things that weren't readily explicable. But it came back with this very generic text. Nancy Combs thinks evidence should be evaluated considering all of the factors. It completely not what she argues, but as I said it like really confidently. And then I put in another author. Can you tell me what such and such says, just to see? And it gave me the exact same answer, but for a completely different author who's argued something else. So I guess what it's done is just gathered sort of the maths.
Well,
of,
it based on all this information and finds an answer. There is a kind of average of everything it gets.
Yeah.
And average is the same for both authors.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So it's like this, our system will do something similar. We'll do an argumentation for Vic was murdered, and the same argumentation for George was murdered.
Yeah, exactly.
But it also explains why.
It's interesting.
ChatGPT cannot explain why it found.
Yeah.
The average, and will give you the average, and will make it more concrete based on your question.
Yeah, because then it was interesting. Then I tried a third author with the same, and for some reason it said, "I'm sorry, I can't find anyone with that name who's written on this topic. Can you tell me like what they've written?" And so then I said, "Yeah, this piece," and I gave a link to SSRN, the paper, and they said, ChatGPT said, "I'm sorry, you're right. I forgot about that." So, I missed that. Yes, I've read the abstract, or like, this is what the abstract says. So this is what this person argues in that paper. And I said, can you read the whole paper and tell me like, what's the whole paper, not just what the abstract says? And ChatGPT said, "I am a language learning model. I cannot read papers." So I was like, "Oh, okay, fair enough." But yeah, it's interesting how I can't quite understand how it corrects itself when you give it more information, I suppose.
Yeah, because it is also a learning system. It uses reinforcement learning, and as it provides more information, it refines the weights in this network and computes slightly differently what is the output, but it's still not able to explain why this output and not another output.
It's so interesting. We're in a brave new world. So coming back to the project you said you were working on that looked at medical diagnosis, basically, do you think there's a risk that people might, because basically people have to give weight themselves to particular pieces of evidence and coming up with these certainty judgments, right? Is there a danger that people might use the system incorrectly, or somehow they have a bias maybe to a particular result, and then it's used in this way? How do we?
Well, I mean, there is a danger. This is the danger anyway, if you're using a computer or not. So
yes,
it is a danger on this. But if you've seen in our book on critical thinking, we give a lot of guidance of how to do this. And about credibility analysis is very detailed. There are all sorts of evidence and tells you what to assess and how.
Yeah.
So if you learn your lessons, you'll do well.
Yeah.
But it requires some work.
And I suppose these are cognitive, biases and things that people have anyway, right? Regardless of whether.
Yeah, you could have biases. Actually, I know for a fact that ChatGPT-4 has biases that was introduced intentionally.
Really?
Yeah, and would not answer some questions if they don't like the person you are asking about. Or,
yes.
Programmed in this way.
Yeah,
but there are also biases that are unintentional. So.
Yeah, like I saw someone had asked ChatGPT, "Can you name me 10 philosophers?" And
can you? Sorry, I hear. Can you?
The question. So somebody asked ChatGPT, "Name me 10 philosophers."
Oh, okay.
And it's like Aristotle, Plato, and so then the person says, "Thank you, but those are all white men, or those are all men. Can you name me some female philosophers?" You're right. I made a mistake. I should have considered. And then it's like Simone de Beauvoir and Martin Nussbaum, all the female philosophers. Okay, but these are all Western. Oh, yes, you're right. How silly of me. Here are some, non-Western, non-male philosophers. And then the conversation comes back, okay, so can you name me 10 philosophers? And it's back to the original list of.
Yeah, because it was a certain way of computing these things.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really understand how it generates the answers.
Yes, yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. And do you think we'll ever get to a stage where we have a system that says, you just plug in, this is all the evidence we have. Is this person guilty or not?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have the system right now, but the problem is that this is not how you should generate the answer as a neural network. We have to build an argumentation based on this evidence and see what is the result of the analyzing this argumentation. So the difference between our approach and ChatGPT and many others is that our approach is very explicit. The system is basically showing you its work, and you can judge by yourself.
Exactly, that transparency.
So the problem here is that there are some very impressive results in AI. For instance, ChatGPT is just the latest one, but before that were others. But if you can, okay. I was looking, I think I brought a bottle of water, which I don't find it now, but anyway. If you just excuse me. Anyway. So, there are some very impressive results. For instance, Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov, was world champion at chess.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Or Watson, it's another IBM system that defeated the best humans at the game Jeopardy. Then AlphaGo is a program that is better at Go than any human. So these are extremely impressive and powerful systems. And people tend to look at them and say, oh, artificial intelligence is so powerful, it will take over, it's better than humans. And this is wrong, because all of these are only programs that execute an algorithm. So there is a big difference between humans and human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So my view is that as impressive as these are not as impressive as one obtained by integrating human intelligence and artificial intelligence, because humans and these systems are complementary. So for instance, computer systems are fast, rigorous, precise, explicit, and objective, but they lack common sense and the ability to deal with new situations. Humans are indeed slow, sloppy, forgetful, implicit, and subjective, but have common sense and intuition, and may find creative solutions in new situations. So, so I think it is this combination. Imagine that Garry Kasparov would use now Deep Blue to play chess. No one can stand them. I mean, with his creativity and intuition, and Deep Blue power of computation. Deep Blue is able to look 14 moves ahead. If you consider to make a move, looks at the consequences after 14 moves, which no human being can do.
Yeah.
Let me give you a very recent example of a system that is being now researched and is being proposed by Dr. Steve Rieber from IARPA. He has just proposed a research project called Reason. Reason comes from rapid explanation, analysis, and sources online. And the problem he tries to solve is the following. You have an analyst that builds an analytic report, maybe using this holistic approach that I was so critical of. But he builds an analytic report, and you is like you as a computer system look over his shoulder, and sees the analyze the report and make him suggestion or her suggestions about the report, like, oh, well, you haven't used this evidence that is relevant, or this reasoning here is not quite right, which is amazing. But this system has to understand not only the natural language, but also understands the logic in that draft analytic report and provides sound suggestions. And this will go a long way to help the analysts build correct analysis analytic reports. So this is a kind of state-of-the-art problem that artificial intelligence is addressing, but it is not neural network. I have nothing. I'm all for neural networks. They are very powerful, but we have to understand their limits. So I think that my view is that none of these programs I mentioned, Deep Blue, and including our Cogent program, have the abilities that are unique to human intelligence, such as creativity, intuition, wisdom, distinguishing between good and evil, consciousness, the capacity to empathize, love, and many others. So my view is that until now, human intelligence has no equal in biological and artificial world from the point of view of versatility, the reasoning skills, achieving goal, understanding and generating language, perception and response to sensory inputs, creative art and music, or writing literature and poems. Of course, you can compose like GPT a poem, but it's not like
okay. Yeah.
So my view is that this scary and futuristic presentation of AI as it's presented in the media and the movies, it's just wrong. In reality, there is no competition between human robots and human robots and real humans.
Yeah.
Basically, no robot has evolutionary goals and intentions. No robot with evolutionary goals and intentions has ever been created, or I can't see any one in the near future. The difference is huge.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've just been reading a lot of appeals chamber judgments from international criminal tribunals, and some of the errors that they found in the trial chamber, so in the lower chamber, have been things like the chamber said they weren't going to find this witness reliable, or they weren't going to rely on this witness's testimony because there were so many problems, but then they drew this finding a fact, and the only evidence on the record for that was this person's testimony. Or the chamber didn't adequately explain why it came to this conclusion. Or the chamber cited this piece of evidence, but we went back and looked at the evidence and that's not what it said. It doesn't support the conclusion. So you can see how something like reason would be brilliant for this task in interrogating a judgment. Is it fully logical? I guess does it do what it says it does?
Well, so one of main contributions of Dave Sham is to use what was done in the field of intelligence, in the field of law in the Anglo-American tradition over the past 500 years, and try to convert this to intelligence analysis. And this includes his ontology of substance, blind classification of evidence, or the procedures for credibility of witnesses. So in my book, I have a lot of such detailed procedures that tell you how to analyze the credibility or even the relevance of evidence. And there is an interesting, I was watching, you may not know, but Dave Kavanaugh was a Supreme Judge, selected a Supreme Judge, and of course he was very controversial. Democrats were criticizing him, Republicans were defending him. And it was interesting that if you look at the debate, there were very credible witnesses on both sides of it, and they seem to both have were right. And how can it be that you have two opinions that are opposed, and they seem very believable? And the reason is that to judge the credibility of a person is very complex. There are many aspects to be taken into account. You look at veracity, objectivity, observational sensitivity, many, and these are complex concepts that could be decomposed into simpler ones. And each concentrating on one part and the other on another part and reach different conclusions. In fact, you have to take all of them into account.
Yeah.
So I think that evidence could be analyzed very detailed, and we law teaches us how to do it, and we formalize it in memorial networks, and could be done. And it's much easier than doing these holistic approaches. And basically, you want to reach the right verdict. I mean, there is nothing more important than reaching the right verdict. And I think we think we have the right approach, not the holistic one. The holistic one is very superficial. And as you mentioned, all this, they say something, then you investigate, people realize that actually it's not what they say. So that's the reason, because it's not detailed reasoning.
So interesting. I have the feeling that we could talk all day, but we've been having this conversation for almost an hour now, so I'm not going to take any more of your time. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and for sharing some of your fantastic research and insights with people in our Evidence Dialogues community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I was very honored. Thank you.